Welcome back to another week of Blast Junior Worship at Home. Just a reminder that our monthly heart print is I can choose to be joyful. Okay, so let's see some smiling faces today. Miss Sherry.
Yes.
What are you doing over there?
Well, remember how last week we talked about our different emotions of scared or sad or even angry? Well, I was reading my Bible and it says to cast all your cares upon Him. So I got this little box and decided to make it my worry box. And as you can see, I can give all of my worries to Jesus and pray over it. So I started writing some of them down. Like sometimes I get scared of the thunder because it just is really loud and it sometimes scares me. So I'm going to put that in the box. Do you have anything?
I do. Sometimes I get scared of snakes. I like to go on bike rides, and when I see snakes, I bike the other way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And sometimes I get really angry when my brother takes my toy, and it makes me really angry, and I have a hard time trying not to get mad at him. So I need to put that in my worry box.
Sometimes I get angry when my friend says something mean to me. It makes me want to yell at them, but
yeah,
I know it's not the right thing to do.
And well, I know people get sick, and right now my grandpa is sick, and so that just really worries me. So I'm gonna put that little note in my worry box too.
Well, I'm in school right now, and sometimes I get worried about my grades. I get really nervous when the test scores come out.
Oh, yeah. And also with being jealous, sometimes my sister, she's just so much smarter than me, and it drives me crazy, and I just have a hard time with that sometimes because I feel that I should be just as smart. But again, I'll put it in my worry box. I have to remember that God made all of us different and smart in our own ways, but that just still is on my mind, so I'm putting that in my worry box.
Sometimes I get jealous at my brother because he always runs so much faster than me. And it doesn't matter how hard I try, he'll always run faster than me.
That's a good one too. So we have our special worry box here. And now that we have all of our worries, we can give to God and know that we can just pray for them and just choose to be joyful, knowing that God is always with us.
Hallelujah, 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 praise ye the Lord. Hallelujah, 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 praise ye the Lord. Praise ye the Lord, hallelujah, praise ye the Lord, hallelujah, praise ye the Lord, hallelujah, praise ye the Lord. Praise, what's that? It's a yippee yahoo, way to go, God! Praise, what's that? It's a yippee yahoo, way to go, God! Hallelujah, 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 praise ye the Lord. Hallelujah, 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 praise ye the Lord. Praise ye the Lord, hallelujah, praise ye the Lord, hallelujah, praise ye the Lord, hallelujah, praise ye the Lord. Praise, what's that? It's a yippee yahoo, way to go, God! Praise, what's that? It's a yippee yahoo, way to go, God!
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua and Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra and Nehemiah, Esther and Job, Psalms, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel and Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos and Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah and Malachi. That is the OT. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus and Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua and Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther and Job, Psalms, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel and Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos and Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah and Malachi. That is the OT. Alright, now let's do the new. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians and Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews and James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Jude and Revelation. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians and Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews and James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Jude and Revelation, Jude and Revelation.
After Jesus ascended to heaven, Christianity swept across the land, and many believed. Jesus' disciples and all who trusted in him were filled with the Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues, performing miracles, and preaching to thousands of people. One such apostle was named Paul. He took God's message to the Gentiles. Paul began traveling to areas far away to preach about Jesus. One of the cities he visited was called Lystra. There he and his friend Barnabas began to preach to the people, telling them that Jesus was the promised one who could save them from their sins. Paul performed many signs and wonders, and people were amazed. Those that were sick came from all over to be healed. Paul wasn't preaching any ordinary message. He was a messenger from God. Thousands of people listened to God's message and turned to Jesus. The religious leaders were not happy about this. They stirred up the people and made up lies about Paul and Barnabas. One day, the people were so furious that they dragged Paul away and started to stone him. Like Stephen was stoned, they wanted to kill Paul too. They thought that they had killed Paul, so they dragged him outside the city. But that was not the end. God's power came over Paul, and he stood up and went right back to preaching in the town. The people were amazed. On another journey, Paul and his friend Silas were put into jail for preaching. That night, as they sat chained in a jail cell, they decided to start singing and praying. Then something strange happened. An earthquake started to shake the prison. The prisoners' chains fell off, and the jail door opened. Everyone could escape, but no one did. Then Paul told him that all the prisoners were still there. The jailer was relieved. He invited Paul to come to his house to preach the good news. That night at the jailer's house, Paul and Silas told them about Jesus, and the jailer and his entire household believed and were baptized. Paul went on many more missionary journeys to bring the gospel of Jesus to as many people as he could. One time he was headed to Rome, but had to journey by sea. As they were drifting on the water, a violent storm erupted and forced their ship into the rocks. Paul and everyone else nearly drowned. They were in the water for a long time, but the current eventually swept them to shore. There they were, stranded on a little island, but everyone was unharmed. Paul was right. No one had died. Even on this remote island, shivering in the cold and recovering from shipwreck, Paul preached the gospel and healed the sick. Many came to believe in Jesus. Paul was unstoppable. With God's power, he kept preaching and planting churches. He was beaten, stoned, whipped, imprisoned, starved, punished, robbed, falsely accused, and suffered greatly. But he kept going. Paul was more than just a missionary, traveler, preacher, and healer. He also wrote long letters. The many letters that Paul wrote to the churches he planted have been preserved for us in the Bible. These letters are inspired, and they teach us about Jesus and about how to live as Christians. God used Paul to spread the good news to many countries.
All right, boys and girls, now it's time to do an activity. And all you need to do is just grab a simple sheet of paper. Mine says at the top, I can choose to be joyful. So you can have your parents write that on top of your paper for you and draw a little smiley face at the bottom to remind you. And Miss Alina, what are we going to do for our art activity today?
Today, we are going to go outside and pretend to look for things like a detective would. Okay, so we have magnifying glasses. If you have one, you can go grab one. If you don't, that's okay. You can just pretend, like I said. But we will be looking for things that God made in His creation.
Yes, because everything God created is joyful for sure. I love seeing the sunset. It's like a beautiful and sunrise painting in the sky.
I love finding bugs and just seeing how they do their everyday routines in the grass and how they hunt for food and stuff like that. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is a lot of fun. All right, so come join us, okay? And I can't wait to see what you guys created on your papers. Look what I found, boys and girls. It's a baby lizard. He's so cute. But I'm gonna let him go back out into the wild.
Hey guys, look what I found. We were walking outside and I found some beautiful flowers that just remind us of God's creation. They look pretty, don't they? And they smell wonderful too. Okay, what else can we find?
Buzzing around the flowers. I'm not gonna get too close though, but it's so cool. It's collecting all the pollen. Yeah.
Hello, welcome to another Mega Minute with Pastor Tommy. Today we're talking about a passage from the book of Philippians. It's chapter 4, verses 10 through 13. It says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want, I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. Most of you have probably heard that last part that says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Now, does that mean I can really be the fastest person in the world? Does that mean I can lift up any amount of weight because I can do anything? Does that mean I'll be superhuman? Not really, but what it does mean is that when God calls us to do something, God gives us the strength to do what He's asked us to do. He talks about being content, whether I have a lot or whether I have a little, I can do whatever God is asking me to do because He's the one actually doing it through me. So I brought my little water vase today to help me, that reminds me of this passage. It's kind of like when God fills me up with His strength, and I'm going to pour this out into my bowl. I'm going to give it all I got, and I'm going to pour it out to the very last drop until it's all gone. And sometimes that's us. We think we've reached our limit. We think there's no way I can keep going. There's no way I can do what God has asked me to do. I can't go on and finish this project or this opportunity, whatever it is that God has called me to do. I am out of strength. But what this verse is talking about, if God has called us to do it, then it's not our strength, it's actually His. And when we think we're empty, God says, let me work through you, through my Spirit. So we think the bowl is empty, but guess what? When we're working with God, He fills us right back up. And so maybe you have a project, or maybe you're struggling with something area in your life and you think, there's just no way I can do this. I can't do this on my own strength. Well, you're right. We can't do it on our own strength. So when He writes this letter, He says, I can do everything through Him. That's exactly what He's talking about, is the God, the one that keeps filling us up and allows us to do and accomplish what He has asked us to do. So I just want to encourage you in your life, if there's something you've been called to do or something you're trying to accomplish, and God has really asked you to do this, then just remember this passage as you think about whether you have a lot, whether you have a little. If God has asked you to do it, He truly is our strength, and He's the one that's going to get the job done through us, because I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength because of Him. Well, thanks for joining us for another Mega Minute. We'll see you next time, but hope you enjoy memorizing this passage and do your best to live it out.